The CEO was denied entry to her penthouse. They laughed until she fired everyone in 5 minutes. It was the kind of mistake security guards make only once in their career, assuming someone doesn't belong based on appearances. The crowd's laughter turned to shocked silence as she methodically demonstrated the true meaning of power and consequence. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Rain drizzled over Manhattan as Danielle Carter pressed her badge against the Regency Heights gate. She wore faded jeans and a university hoodie, a stark contrast to the silk and cashmere swirling around the marble lobby. The security guard, Frank, eyed her with disdain, lips curled in a smirk. "Lost your way, ma'am. This isn't the subway entrance." Danielle's grip tightened on her lease. "I own the penthouse, number 32. Her words bounced off marble. Drawing snickers from 2 doormen nearby, Frank snatched her paperwork, barely glancing before tossing it back. "Fake. You're wasting our time." "I assure you, it's not fake," Danielle said calmly, though her pulse quickened. At 34, she'd grown accustomed to being underestimated. The tech company she'd built from her dorm room had just gone public last month, catapulting her net worth to 9 figures overnight. The penthouse purchase had been her one indulgence. Frank crossed his arms. "Listen, honey, I've worked here 15 years. I know every resident by face." He gestured toward her worn sneakers. "And they don't look like that." The 2 doormen, Bradley and Thomas according to their name tags, exchanged amused glances. Bradley whispered something that made Thomas stifle a laugh behind his white-gloved hand. "Perhaps I should call the building manager," Danielle suggested, reaching for her phone. "Go ahead," Frank challenged, leaning back in his chair. "Mr. Harrington doesn't appreciate having his Saturday disturbed by trespassers." A well-dressed couple exited the elevator, their eyes darting between Danielle and the security desk before hurrying outside. The woman whispered something to her companion, both glancing back with undisguised curiosity. "I'm not leaving," Danielle stated firmly. "I closed on this property Thursday. My belongings arrive tomorrow morning." Frank's radio crackled. "And everything all right down there?" came a voice Danielle recognized as Gerald, the night manager she'd met during her final walkthrough. Frank grabbed the radio. "Just some confusion. Got someone claiming to own 32. There was a pause. "The Carter penthouse. Send her up immediately." The color drained from Frank's face. Bradley and Thomas suddenly found the marble floor fascinating. "Seems there's been a misunderstanding," Frank stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "I'll need to see ID, of course. Building protocol." Danielle retrieved her driver's license, placing it deliberately on the counter. As Frank examined it, his expression shifted from skepticism to dawning horror. "Ms. Carter," he swallowed hard. "Welcome to Regency Heights." A ripple of laughter echoed from a cluster of residents waiting for the elevator. One woman, wearing an expensive cashmere sweater and pearl earrings, leaned toward her companion. "She must be another scammer," she whispered, loud enough for Danielle to hear. Her friend, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, nodded knowingly. "Probably hoping for a free tour of the penthouse. They're getting more creative these days." The words hit Danielle like a physical blow. Throughout her career, she had faced countless skeptics and critics, but being mocked in the lobby of her own building cut deeper than she expected. She glanced down at her casual attire, the worn jeans and simple blouse she'd thrown on for the cross-country flight, and momentarily understood their mistake. But understanding didn't ease the sting. Danielle straightened her spine, a reflexive action honed through years of boardroom battles. She had stared down hostile takeover attempts and navigated corporate crises that would have broken most executives. This was nothing. Yet somehow, being dismissed as irrelevant in what should have been her sanctuary felt uniquely painful. She turned to face Frank directly, her gaze unwavering. The security guard shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny, but maintained his position. Behind his professional facade, Danielle detected a flicker of uncertainty. Good, he should be uncertain. "I understand you're doing your job," she said, her voice low and controlled. "But I need you to understand something too. This is my home, and I will be entering it today." Frank's expression hardened. "Ma'am, without proper identification or authorization from a resident, I cannot call Patricia Reynolds," Danielle interrupted. "Tell her Danielle Mercer is here." The name drop caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The whispering residents fell silent, exchanging glances. Patricia Reynolds was the head of the building's board. Everyone knew that. Frank hesitated, his hand hovering over the phone. Now, Danielle added, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. As Frank reluctantly reached for the receiver, Danielle felt a cold determination settling over her. The laughter had stopped, but the humiliation lingered. She had built her reputation on fair treatment and respect for all employees, regardless of their position. Today had shown her something important about her own building's culture, and she didn't like what she saw. Frank's radio buzzed with static, and he flicked it off with a practiced thumb, never breaking his mocking stare. "You're not on the list, Danielle. We checked twice. Maybe you should try elsewhere." His voice carried that special tone security guards reserve for people they believe don't belong, condescending with just enough professional distance to avoid a complaint. A thin, nervous receptionist named Grace approached from behind the marble desk. She wore her brown hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her pale skin. "I can double-check the system," she offered, fingers already tapping at her keyboard. After a moment, she looked up with an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No Danielle Carter on file for penthouse 32, sorry." Danielle's patience already stretched thin after her 14-hour flight, and the taxi driver who'd taken the longest possible route from the airport was evaporating rapidly. She set her designer luggage down with deliberate care and straightened to her full height. "Check under Carter, Danielle Carter, penthouse 32. Her voice remained level, but anyone who knew her would recognize the dangerous edge that had emerged. "The penthouse I purchased 3 months ago." Silence thickened in the lobby. A couple waiting for the elevator exchanged glances and deliberately looked away. Frank crossed his arms, his security badge gleaming under the chandelier light. Grace's fingers hovered uncertainly over her keyboard. "Ma'am, there's no Carter listed as an owner." "Perhaps you're mistaken about the building," Frank suggested, his tone suggesting he was being extraordinarily patient with someone clearly confused. Danielle reached into her purse and extracted her phone. "I have the deed right here. Purchased from Westlake Properties on February 12th. She pulled up the document and held it toward them, along with the confirmation email from your management company welcoming me to the building. Grace leaned forward to examine the screen, her expression shifting from dismissive to confused. This does look legitimate, but our system shows Penthouse 32 is still owned by Westlake Properties. It's listed as unoccupied." "Well, that's interesting," Danielle replied, her voice dangerously soft, "because I paid $4 million for it, and I'd very much like to go up to my home now." Frank shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone can fake documents on a phone. Without system verification, we can't—" "Call Thomas Westlake," Danielle interrupted. "Right now. Mr. Westlake, the CEO of Westlake. We can't just—" "You can, and you will," Danielle said, pulling out a business card and sliding it across the counter. "Or I can call him myself." Grace's eyes widened as she read the card. "You're— Oh my God." Frank leaned in, voice low and razor-sharp. "We see your type all the time. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just accept that you're not getting in without proper authorization." His breath smelled of coffee and contempt, and Danielle had to resist the urge to step back. Instead, She planted her feet more firmly on the polished marble floor, feeling the weight of every eye in the lobby upon her. Danielle's eyes flashed with a dangerous glint that would have warned anyone who truly knew her. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her fist, which she kept tightly clenched at her side. She could feel her pulse pounding in her temples, the familiar pressure that built whenever she was being underestimated. A hush swept the lobby as the building manager, Mr. Hollis, strode over in a tailored suit that probably cost more than what most security guards made in a month. His salt-and-pepper hair was immaculately styled, and impatience was etched on his face like it belonged there permanently. "What's the issue here?" he demanded, barely looking at Danielle, addressing Frank instead as if she were invisible or merely an inconvenience to be dealt with. He carried himself with the self-importance of a man who wielded just enough power to be dangerous, but not enough to be truly significant. "This woman claims she lives in the penthouse, sir," Frank explained, straightening his posture in the presence of his superior. "No ID, not on the approved residence list, says she's some big-shot CEO." The way he emphasized big shot dripped with mockery. Mr. Hollis finally deigned to look at Danielle, his gaze sweeping over her casual attire with undisguised judgment. His eyes narrowed slightly, calculating whether she was worth his time or just another delusional person trying to gain access to the building's most exclusive residence. "Ma'am," Mr. Hollis began, his tone condescending as if speaking to a child, "this is a secure building with very specific protocols. Our penthouse residents are well known to staff." He pulled out a tablet from his jacket pocket and made a show of scrolling through what Danielle assumed was the resident list. "I personally know every penthouse owner, and I can assure you, you're not one of them." The smug certainty in his voice made Danielle's blood boil, but years of boardroom battles had taught her to channel anger into precision. She reached slowly into her pocket, a movement that made Frank tense reflexively. Frank gestured dismissively toward the papers in Danielle's hand. "Claims she owns the penthouse. Documents are complete junk," he said with a smirk that revealed yellowing teeth. Mr. Hollis adjusted his glasses and scanned Danielle from head to toe, taking in her casual attire that certainly didn't scream CEO. His lips curled into a condescending smile as he exchanged knowing glances with the other board members. "Miss, I believe your little story ends right here. I suggest you leave the premises before we're forced to call the police." His voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Danielle didn't flinch. Not a single muscle in her face betrayed emotion as she stood her ground, shoulders squared and chin slightly raised. "You might want to check the actual property records before you further embarrass yourself, Mr. Hollis," she replied, her voice steady and cool as winter air. The crowd of residents and staff who had gathered in the lobby leaned in collectively, hungry for the unfolding spectacle. Several pulled out their phones, sensing something worth recording was about to happen. "Is that a threat?" Mr. Hollis asked, his voice rising slightly as his confidence wavered for just a moment. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uncertain glances. Frank's smirk began to fade as he noticed Danielle's unwavering composure. Something about her calm demeanor in the face of their dismissal felt unsettling, like the stillness before a storm. "Not a threat," Danielle replied, reaching into her bag and producing another folder. "Just a fact. And here's another fact you might find interesting." She opened the folder and turned it toward them. "These are the complete ownership records for Skyline Towers, including this building and 3 others in your portfolio. Perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone gathered here why you've been misrepresenting the ownership structure to the residents for the past 2 years. The hushed whispers spreading through the crowd grew louder as Mr. Hollis's face drained of color. Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly as she added, "And while we're having this enlightening conversation, shall we discuss the discrepancies I've found in the maintenance fee allocations?" Mr. Hollis rolled his eyes, the gesture dripping with condescension. "Security! Escort her out," he commanded, waving his hand dismissively as if shooing away an annoying insect. Frank, the burly security guard, stepped forward and reached for Danielle's arm with his meaty hand. Danielle took a deliberate step backward, her posture shifting subtly from defensive to dangerous. "Touch me, and you'll regret it," she said, her voice low and measured. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Slicing through the pretentious atmosphere, gasps rippled across the gathering, traveling across the polished marble floor as residents exchanged worried glances. The tension in the lobby was palpable now. Several residents who had been enjoying the spectacle moments before began edging toward the elevators, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction this confrontation was taking. Mr. Hollis, however, seemed determined to double down on his mistake. "Fine," he snapped, pulling out his phone with theatrical flair. "Let's get the police involved. I'm sure they'll be very interested in a trespasser making threats." Without missing a beat, Danielle reached into her designer bag and extracted her own phone. With practiced ease, she opened the camera app and began recording, the red indicator light pointing directly at Mr. Hollis's increasingly flustered face. "Excellent idea," she replied, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his growing agitation. "Let's get everything on the record. I'm sure the officers will be very interested in hearing how you've denied a property owner access to her own home." Mr. Hollis's face flushed an alarming shade of crimson. The phone in his hand trembled slightly as uncertainty crept into his expression. For the first time since the confrontation began, doubt flickered across his features. "You can't just—" he began. But Danielle cut him off. "I can and I am," she stated firmly, continuing to record. "Now, would you like to explain to my camera why you're preventing me from entering my own property? Or should we wait for the police to arrive so you can explain it to them instead?" A heavy silence fell over the lobby. The residents who had remained to watch the drama unfold now shifted uncomfortably, the entertainment value of the situation rapidly diminishing as they realized they might be witnessing something with serious legal consequences. The lobby fell into an awkward silence as the police cruiser's lights cast alternating blue and red patterns across the marble floor. Two officers, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a weathered face, strode through the revolving doors with practiced authority, their hands instinctively positioned near their utility belts. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. "Officers, thank God you're here," Mr. Hollis exclaimed, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. He straightened his tie and stepped forward. "This woman is attempting to trespass on private property. She's presented falsified ownership documents and is causing a disturbance." He gestured dramatically toward Danielle, his expression suggesting he was dealing with a common criminal rather than the company's CEO. Danielle maintained her composure, meeting the officers' questioning gazes with unwavering confidence. Without a word, she reached into her designer handbag and retrieved a leather portfolio containing her documentation. "Officers, I'm Danielle Carter," she stated calmly, handing over her papers. "I own the penthouse on the 32nd floor. Feel free to check your system. Everything's in order." The female officer accepted the documents, reviewing them carefully while her partner maintained a watchful eye on the increasingly uncomfortable lobby staff. Several employees had begun to shift nervously, exchanging worried glances as the realization dawned that they might have made a catastrophic error in judgment. "We'll need to verify this information," the officer said professionally, stepping away to radio dispatch. Her partner followed, leaving a few feet of distance to conduct their verification process. Mr. Hollis's confidence visibly wavered as he watched the officers nod to each other during their check. Beads of sweat formed along his hairline, and he tugged at his collar as if it had suddenly tightened around his neck. The security guard who had been so dismissive earlier now found something fascinating to study on the floor tiles. Danielle stood perfectly still, her designer heels planted firmly on the marble floor. She didn't fidget or plead her case further. She didn't need to. The truth was already making its way through official channels, and the reckoning that would follow hung in the air like an approaching storm. The crowd fell silent as the confrontation escalated. A little girl, no older than 7, clutched her mother's hand tightly, her wide brown eyes fixed on Danielle. "Why are they being so mean to her, Mommy?" she whispered, loud enough for Danielle to hear in the sudden quiet. The mother gave her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze, shaking her head slightly as a flicker of sympathy crossed her face. Danielle caught the child's innocent gaze, and for a heartbeat her resolve wavered. There was something about being seen through a child's eyes, the pure, unfiltered perception that cut through social hierarchies and corporate titles. For a moment, she wasn't the CEO of Carter Industries. She was just a woman being treated unfairly while others watched. The realization stung more than she cared to admit. The security guard who had left to verify her claims returned. His demeanor noticeably changed. He cleared his throat awkwardly, avoiding direct eye contact with either Danielle or his colleague. "I've checked the records," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "They confirm that Danielle Carter is indeed the owner of the penthouse on the top floor." The other guard's face drained of color. The doorman, who had been so dismissive earlier, suddenly found great interest in straightening his uniform. A few residents exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others stared at their phones, pretending they hadn't been part of the spectacle moments before. "I see," Danielle said, her voice level but carrying an edge that made several people flinch. "And did those records also confirm my position as the CEO of Carter Industries, which, incidentally, owns this entire building?" The security guard nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am. The property is registered under Carter Holdings, and you are listed as the primary executive and owner." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone whispered, "Carter Industries, that's one of the biggest companies in the city." Another voice added, "My brother works there, says the CEO is brilliant, but—" The voice trailed off as Danielle's gaze swept the lobby. The doorman stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by a sickly smile. "Ms. Carter, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If you'd allow me to escort you to your penthouse personally—" Danielle raised her hand, silencing him mid-sentence. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice cool and controlled, "but I will need your full name for my records." Frank's face drained of all color as the implications hit him. Mr. Hollis, who had been so smug just moments earlier, now stammered, "That must be a mistake. There's no way." His voice trailed off as he frantically scrolled through his tablet, searching for some evidence to contradict her claim. "It's not a mistake," Danielle replied, her voice as cold as winter steel. Every word she spoke seemed to drop the temperature in the lobby by another degree. "And now, I want to speak to the CEO. Immediately." The security officer, who had witnessed his fair share of building disputes, but clearly nothing of this magnitude, raised his radio to his lips with a slightly trembling hand. "Sir, we have a situation in the main lobby. The woman claims to be, well, she says she's the owner of the entire building." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Frank began loosening his tie, which suddenly felt like it was choking him. The receptionist who had been snickering earlier was now staring intently at her computer screen, pretending to be invisible. Within minutes, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime that seemed deafening in the tense atmosphere. Patricia Lang, the building's CEO, swept through the doors with the confident stride of someone used to commanding rooms. She was flanked by 2 directors, both looking equally concerned and confused. "What seems to be the problem here?" Patricia asked, her gaze darting between the security officer and the disheveled woman in casual clothes. Before anyone could respond, Danielle stepped forward. "Miss Lang, I believe we spoke briefly on the phone last month. I'm Danielle Carter." Recognition flickered across Patricia's face, followed quickly by alarm. She gestured dismissively to the security team. "Stand down. Ms. Carter is indeed who she claims to be." Mr. Hollis made a choking sound. "But she can't possibly." "She absolutely can," Patricia interrupted sharply. "In fact, gentlemen, you're standing in the lobby of her building, refusing her entry to her own property." The security officer's radio slipped from his fingers. Clattering loudly on the marble floor, Frank looked like he might be sick. "Ms. Carter," Patricia continued, her professional demeanor firmly back in place, "I apologize profusely for this misunderstanding. If you'll follow me, we can discuss this situation in private." As Danielle moved toward the elevator, she paused briefly beside Mr. Hollis. "I believe we have some paperwork to review regarding your employment contract," she said quietly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Patricia barely paused to catch her breath as she entered the conference room. The atmosphere was tense, with executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Miss Carter, what exactly is happening here?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made everyone sit up straighter. Danielle stood beside the projection screen, tablet in hand, her posture professional, despite the obvious tension in the room. Her summary of events was clinical and methodical, but as she spoke, every slight, every dismissive comment, every instance where Patricia's authority had been undermined was laid bare for all to hear. With each revelation, Patricia's expression hardened, her eyes growing colder, her lips pressing into a thinner line. When Danielle finished speaking, the silence in the room was absolute. No one dared to even clear their throat. Patricia slowly turned to face Mr. Hollis, who had gone from smug to ashen in the span of Danielle's presentation. "Mr. Hollis," Patricia's tone was glacial, each word precisely enunciated, effective immediately. "You are suspended pending a full investigation into your conduct. You will surrender all company property and leave the premises within the hour." Without waiting for his response, she shifted her gaze to Frank, whose arrogance had melted away entirely. "Frank, hand in your security badge and access cards now. Your services are no longer required at this company." Finally, she turned to Grace, who seemed to physically shrink under Patricia's gaze. "Grace, your conduct will be thoroughly reviewed by HR. Until then, you're on administrative leave." The room remained frozen as Patricia stood tall, her authority no longer in question. The three who had been singled out didn't move, as if hoping this was some terrible joke. "I believe I was clear," Patricia said, her voice somehow even colder than before. "You have 5 minutes to begin complying with my directives before security escorts you out." Only then did the reality of the situation seem to dawn on them, and the scramble began. Frank hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly as he unclipped his security badge from his uniform. The weight of his actions finally sinking in, he tossed the badge onto Patricia's desk, his face burning with a deep crimson shame. He couldn't bring himself to look at Danielle, the woman he'd humiliated just hours ago, standing there with quiet dignity while his career imploded. Mr. Hollis sputtered beside him, his hands gesticulating wildly as he tried to salvage the situation. "Now wait just a minute. This is completely unnecessary. Frank was just doing his job. We have protocols." Patricia silenced him with a single, withering glare, her voice cutting through his protest like a steel blade through butter. "We do not tolerate discrimination in this building or anywhere in my company. Not today, not ever." The residents who had gathered in the lobby, the very same people who had snickered and recorded the earlier confrontation on their phones, now shifted uncomfortably. Some found sudden interest in their shoes, others pretended to check their watches or phones, averting their eyes from the scene unfolding before them. The entertainment value had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that they had been complicit in something ugly. A few whispered among themselves, no doubt wondering if their own behavior would come under scrutiny next. Danielle stood taller now, her shoulders squared and her chin lifted slightly. The vindication she felt was undeniable, a sweet relief after hours of humiliation, but it mixed with a bone-deep exhaustion. Fighting battles like this one was nothing new to her. But that didn't make them any less draining. She caught the eye of an elderly woman who had been particularly vocal during her initial rejection, and the woman quickly looked away. Patricia moved to stand beside Danielle, a silent show of solidarity that spoke volumes. The lobby, once buzzing with excited whispers and barely concealed laughter, had fallen into a heavy, contemplative silence. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. Patricia stood in the center of the marble lobby, her voice carrying with a newfound authority that seemed to bounce off the polished stone surfaces. "I want to be absolutely clear about something," she announced, making eye contact with as many staff members as possible. "If anyone else has concerns about being treated unfairly in this building, now is the time to speak up. Change doesn't happen in silence, and change begins now." The declaration hung in the air, met first with stunned silence, then with murmurs of surprise. A few residents who happened to be passing through exchanged glances, and Patricia noticed several tentative nods from staff members who had previously seemed afraid to make eye contact with her. Danielle stepped forward, her tablet in hand, her professional demeanor fully restored. "I'd like to request immediate access to the security footage from this morning," she said, her voice steady. "And while you're at it, I want copies of all complaints filed by minority residents over the past 12 months. She paused, letting the weight of her request sink in. "I'm particularly interested in any patterns that might emerge." Patricia nodded, her expression serious. "You'll have everything by noon today. I'll personally oversee the compilation." She turned to address the head of security, who had been hovering nervously at the edge of the gathering. "Marcus, please ensure Ms. Reynolds has unrestricted access to all footage and records. This is a priority." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, there are privacy protocols, which I'm fully authorized to override as building manager," Patricia interrupted firmly. "This isn't a request, Marcus." A cleaning staff member who had been quietly mopping nearby paused her work. "Miss," she said hesitantly, her voice accented, "and there are things that happen when the managers aren't around." She glanced nervously at her colleagues before continuing. "Things said to people like me." Patricia walked over to her, consciously softening her expression. "What's your name?" "Elena," the woman replied, gripping her mop handle tightly. "Elena, I'd like to hear about those things. Would you feel comfortable talking to me in my office later today?" Elena nodded slowly, surprise evident in her eyes at being addressed directly by management. That afternoon, the mood in the office was electric with anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire about the morning's events, and when Danielle called an all-hands meeting, every remaining employee showed up 15 minutes early. They gathered in the largest conference room, whispering among themselves, theories flying about what might happen next. When Danielle walked in, the room fell instantly silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "This morning was difficult, but necessary. Now we rebuild." She unveiled a comprehensive plan for sweeping changes throughout the organization. First, she introduced new anti-discrimination policies with teeth, not just empty corporate speak-y, but actionable protocols with clear consequences. Next came the announcement of an independent review board for employee grievances, staffed by a rotating panel of peers and executives to ensure fairness. "And effective immediately," Danielle continued, "we're establishing a confidential hotline for reporting any incidents of discrimination, harassment, or unethical behavior. She explained how the system would protect whistleblowers while ensuring thorough investigation of all claims. The staff listened in stunned silence, many exchanging glances that mixed hope with skepticism. Could this really be happening? One brave soul raised her hand. With all due respect, Ms. Chen, we've heard promises before. How do we know this time will be different? Danielle nodded, appreciating the candor. Fair question. The difference is me. She placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. I've experienced firsthand what happens when power goes unchecked. You saw this morning that I'm willing to make difficult decisions when necessary. Her eyes swept across the room, making contact with each person. This isn't about policies on paper. This is about changing our culture from the ground up. She straightened and delivered her final words with quiet intensity. Let me be crystal clear. No one will be treated as less than ever again. Not on my watch. The room remained silent, but something had shifted. For the first time in years, many employees felt something they'd almost forgotten: respect for leadership, and perhaps even a flicker of hope. After the dust had settled, Grace approached Danielle in the lobby, her voice noticeably trembling. I'm so sorry, Ms. Carter. I should have spoken up when they were treating you that way. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. Her eyes were downcast, fingers nervously intertwining as she spoke. Danielle studied the young woman's face for a long moment. There was genuine remorse there, not just fear of consequences. She remembered how Grace had at least attempted to check her credentials, unlike the others who had jumped straight to judgment and mockery. You have a chance to do better now, Grace, Danielle finally said, her tone firm but not unkind. Use it. That's all any of us can do when we've made a mistake. Learn and grow from it. Grace nodded gratefully, relief washing over her features. Thank you, Ms. Carter. I won't let you down. Word of what had happened spread through the building like wildfire. By evening, every resident knew about the new CEO who had been denied entry to her own penthouse and how she had subsequently fired the entire lobby staff, except for Grace. The story grew with each retelling, some versions claiming she had arrived in sweatpants, others insisting she had been covered in mud from a charity marathon. In the elevators, residents shifted uncomfortably whenever Danielle entered. Some mumbled hasty apologies for the unfortunate misunderstanding, while others simply avoided her gaze altogether, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the changing floor numbers. One elderly gentleman who had lived in the building for decades approached her directly. Ms. Carter, I want to apologize on behalf of the residents. This isn't how we typically treat our neighbors. I appreciate that, Danielle replied. But I'd rather be judged by my character than my appearance going forward. That's all I ask of anyone here. The building's atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Where once there had been casual snobbery and unexamined prejudice, there was now a heightened awareness of assumptions and their consequences. Some residents were genuinely reflective, while others were simply afraid of crossing the woman who had demonstrated such decisive power. Either way, Danielle noticed the difference. The same people who had snickered behind their hands now nodded respectfully when they passed her. The transformation was remarkable and somewhat amusing. Nothing changed people's behavior quite like witnessing consequences in action. Within a week, Patricia had completed her thorough investigation and made her decision. The board meeting was brief and unanimous. The suspensions of Mr. Hollis and Frank were converted to permanent terminations, effective immediately. Their personnel files now contained detailed accounts of discriminatory behavior, abuse of power, and violation of multiple company policies. Patricia insisted that the reason for their dismissal be made public within the company, a clear message that such behavior would never be tolerated again. An official email went out to all residents of the building the following morning. At Skyline Properties, we believe in transparency and accountability, it began. Recent events have highlighted failures in our service standards that we take very seriously. 2 staff members have been terminated for conduct that violates our core values of respect and fairness. The message continued with a renewed commitment to equal treatment for all residents regardless of appearance, occupation, or any other factor. For Danielle, the vindication felt strangely hollow. She hadn't wanted anyone to lose their jobs. She had simply wanted to be treated with basic dignity. The morning after the announcement, she found a handwritten note slipped under her door from Teresa, the weekend receptionist. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up that day. What happened to you was wrong." Throughout the day, 3 other staff members approached her with similar sentiments, their eyes downcast, voices hushed with embarrassment. Most residents and staff, however, processed their shame differently, through avoidance. People who had laughed or stared that day now took great pains to look busy when she passed. The security guard who had blocked her way now greeted her with exaggerated formality. The neighbor who had filmed the incident deleted the video and pretended it never happened. Danielle understood. Shame was a powerful emotion, and people handled it differently. She didn't need groveling apologies. The systemic change mattered more than individual expressions of regret. Still, as she rode the elevator up to her penthouse that evening, she couldn't help but feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air, the awkward silence of a community coming to terms with its collective failure. Danielle felt it before she could name it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of Westwood Heights. The security guard who had once blocked her entry now nodded respectfully when she passed. The front desk staff greeted her with genuine smiles rather than the forced politeness they'd shown before. Even Mrs. Henderson from the 3rd floor, who had initially signed the petition against her, stopped to chat about the community garden Danielle had helped establish. Most telling were the numbers. Complaints from residents in the building's less prestigious floors had dropped by 70% in just 2 weeks. The maintenance staff reported feeling more valued, and 3 employees who had been planning to quit had decided to stay. It wasn't acceptance, not completely, but it was the beginning of something authentic. "You've changed things around here," Marcus told her one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly reports in her office. "People are starting to see what I saw in you from the beginning." Danielle didn't want to get her hopes up too quickly. "Change takes time," she replied cautiously. "We still have work to do." Yet she couldn't deny the evidence. Yesterday, she had found herself in the courtyard, laughing with a group of residents she'd never spoken with before. They were planning a building-wide potluck, and someone had suggested Danielle bring her grandmother's famous apple pie that she'd mentioned in passing weeks ago. The fact that someone had remembered that small detail touched her deeply. This morning, she'd helped Mrs. Patel from the 7th floor carry groceries when the older woman's arthritis was acting up. The gratitude in Mrs. Patel's eyes wasn't performative. It was genuine connection between neighbors. For the first time since moving in, Danielle didn't feel like an outsider trying to prove her worth. She felt finally at home, not because the building had suddenly transformed into a utopia, but because she'd stopped trying to fit into someone else's vision of what belonged here. She'd created her own space. As she watered the plants on her balcony that evening, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, Danielle realized something profound. The battle had never really been about the penthouse. It had been about claiming her right to belong, not just in a building, but in the world she'd worked so hard to succeed in. 6 months had passed since the infamous showdown at Regency Heights, and the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The once snooty building staff now greeted every resident by name with genuine warmth, and a beautifully crafted wooden sign with "Fairness" in bold letters hung prominently above the front desk, a daily reminder of the values that now defined the building's culture. Even Mrs. Patel from the 3rd floor, who had previously complained about being ignored, now regularly brought homemade samosas for the doorman who always remembered to ask about her grandchildren. For Danielle, the change went beyond professional satisfaction. The hurt and humiliation of that rainy morning had crystallized into something unexpected, a quiet strength that informed her decisions both at work and in her personal life. She found herself more attuned to instances of unfairness in meetings, more likely to speak up when junior employees were overlooked, and more determined to create environments where everyone felt valued regardless of their title or appearance. "Dean, the funny thing about power," she told her executive coach during their monthly session, "is that wielding it responsibly is so much more fulfilling than using it to intimidate others." Her coach nodded, noting how Danielle's leadership ratings had soared across all departments since the incident. One evening, as Danielle entered her building wearing jeans and a casual sweater after volunteering at a youth mentorship program, Marcus, one of the new doormen, smiled broadly. "Good evening, Ms. Reynolds. How was your day?" There was no hesitation, no scrutiny of her outfit, just genuine respect. "Wonderful, thanks for asking. Marcus, how's your son's baseball team doing?" "They won their division championship. I have pictures on my phone I've been waiting to show you." As Danielle admired the photos of Marcus's beaming 9-year-old son holding a trophy, she realized something profound. The hurt that had once consumed her had transformed into purpose. She no longer needed validation from others to feel worthy of occupying her space, whether in the boardroom or in her own home. The lesson had been painful, but necessary. Later that night, as she looked out from her terrace at the twinkling city lights, Danielle smiled to herself. Sometimes life's most important victories weren't about proving others wrong, but about discovering the strength to make things right, not just for yourself, but for everyone. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lobby, Danielle leaned against the reception desk, observing a scene that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. Grace, who once cowered in fear of making eye contact with residents, was now confidently welcoming a visibly nervous new tenant. Her voice carried a warmth that filled the marble-floored entrance as she handed over keys and explained building protocols with patient expertise. "The delivery entrance is around back, but don't worry if you forget, we've all done it," Grace said with a reassuring smile. "And here's my direct number if you need anything at all during your move-in." The new tenant's shoulders visibly relaxed, tension melting away under Grace's genuine kindness. Danielle couldn't help but smile, recognizing in this simple interaction the profound power of second chances. She remembered Grace's tearful gratitude when offered her job back, not as a subordinate, but as the building's head of resident relations, a position Danielle created specifically to utilize Grace's natural empathy. Danielle checked her watch and headed toward the elevator. As she rode up to her penthouse, she reflected on how the building's atmosphere had transformed. The staff no longer worked from fear, but from respect. Residents greeted each other in hallways. The community garden on the 4th floor, once Danielle's solitary pet project, now had a waiting list for plots. As dusk fell, Danielle stepped onto her balcony with a glass of wine. The city lights began their nightly dance, flickering to life one by one against the deepening blue sky. The view had always been spectacular, but tonight it seemed to hold new meaning, a constellation of lives and stories, all connected in ways both seen and unseen. From below, the sound of laughter drifted upward. The monthly resident mixer was in full swing in the courtyard. Danielle recognized Mrs. Patel's distinctive laugh, mingling with Mr. Johnson's baritone chuckle. These were people who once crossed the lobby with suspicious glances, who complained about each other in angry emails to management. Now they shared stories over glasses of wine and plates of potluck offerings. Danielle took a sip from her glass, savoring both the Cabernet and the moment. This was the true victory, not the corner office she'd fought for, not the title on her business card, but this, A community where trust could grow, where suspicion once dwelled, where people could fail and still find redemption. In giving others a second chance, she had somehow found her own. Danielle gazed out over the glittering cityscape from her penthouse balcony, the lights below mirroring the stars above. The cool evening breeze carried away the last remnants of stress from the past few months. She allowed herself this rare moment of tranquility, knowing how precious and fleeting such moments could be. The memory of that humiliating morning still flickered in her mind occasionally, standing in her own lobby, being denied entry, the smirks and whispers. But those memories no longer stung with the same intensity. They had transformed into something else entirely, a reminder of her resilience, her power, and her unwavering determination to stand her ground. "Miss Reynolds?" Her assistant's voice called softly from inside. "The board members are sending congratulations. The company stock jumped another 12% today." Danielle smiled, but didn't turn around immediately. "Thank you, Eliza. Tell them I'll review the reports tomorrow morning." After Eliza departed, Danielle took a sip of her wine. The victory wasn't just about reinstating herself, or even about the 5 minutes that changed everything. It was about the systemic changes she'd implemented afterward, new security protocols that treated everyone with respect, a complete overhaul of the toxic culture that had allowed such discrimination to fester, accountability measures that ensured no one, regardless of appearance or background, would face what she had endured. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner tomorrow? The team wants to celebrate 1 month since the reorg." She typed back a quick, "Absolutely," before returning her gaze to the horizon. Danielle knew her battle was just one of many, a ripple in a much larger tide of similar struggles happening in buildings across the city, the country, the world. Women in positions of power still faced obstacles that their male counterparts never encountered, yet tonight she allowed herself to feel satisfied, not complacent, never that, but proud of what she'd accomplished. The company was thriving under her renewed leadership. The board that had once whispered about replacing her now praised her decisive action, and most importantly, she had created an environment where merit mattered more than appearance or connections. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be those who questioned her authority, who waited for her to fail, but Danielle Reynolds was no longer afraid of those voices. She had faced down her worst professional humiliation and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, she was ready. The next morning, the lobby glowed with warm sunlight as a young couple stepped through the entrance, a sleepy toddler perched on the father's shoulders. The little one clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with wonder at the gleaming marble floors and towering potted plants. Grace emerged from behind her desk, her smile genuine and welcoming, a far cry from the robotic performance she'd given just weeks earlier. "Welcome home," she said, extending her hand to the young mother. "I'm Grace, your head of resident services. We've prepared everything for your arrival, and there's a welcome basket waiting in your apartment. Please, let us know if you need anything at all to make your transition smoother." The couple exchanged pleased glances, clearly not expecting such a warm reception. The father lowered his daughter to the floor, and Grace knelt to the child's level, complimenting her rabbit with such sincere interest that the shy toddler broke into a dimpled smile. From her vantage point on the mezzanine above, Danielle watched the scene unfold, her coffee cooling in her hands. A gentle smile played across her lips as she observed the family's first moments in what would become their home. The building was changing. She could feel it in the air, see it in the way staff now greeted residents with genuine warmth, rather than practiced deference. The battle with the board wasn't over. Just yesterday, 2 members had questioned her latest proposal for community spaces in the building. Old habits died hard, and entrenched power rarely surrendered without a fight. But watching Grace escort the family to the elevators, pointing out amenities with pride rather than obligation, Danielle knew something fundamental had shifted. This victory, small as it might seem to outsiders, would ripple through every interaction, every policy decision, every new family that crossed that threshold. She had transformed not just a building's management, but its very soul. And in doing so, she had reclaimed her own place within these walls, not as an outsider to be challenged, but as the architect of a new beginning. Danielle took a final sip of her coffee and turned toward her office. There was still work to be done.